Welcome to another Deep Well Services training video. Today we're going to be going over inspections in the components of our 300K cave-in style CRW slips. Slips are one of the most important components of our HCUs. They're designed to grip and hold pipe securely in place when we're running pipe in or out of the hole. That holding power is what keeps control of the well and protects everyone working around it. But here's the thing, if those slips aren't properly inspected, if they're damaged, worn, or installed correctly, that grip can fail. A slip failure can quickly turn into a serious safety incident. Our policy requires slip inspection to be performed by the operator and confirmed by the supervisor. This should be done before installing the BHA in the stack and opening the well, before going through transition or snubbing, and before you have to open up the stripping annular, i.e. during ram changes, removal of the BHA after closing the frac valve, when you have to dial out the accumulator circuit for repairs, or if you have to shut down the power pack. Before the inspection, it is crucial to have good communication in the basket by holding a heads-up meeting. The slip handle should be locked out and the slip pressure dialed to 0. This will prevent unwanted functioning of the slips while an employee's hands are in the pinch zone. Let's dive into the different slip parts and what we're looking at when we're inspecting each component on these CRW slips. Over time, the slip bowl can begin to show wear beyond the bolt-in wear plates. The bowl should be inspected to ensure they are within tolerance anytime you change out those wear plates. Slip bowls should maintain an ID of 9.75 to 9.755 inches at the top edge of the bowl. And you can check this with a 12-inch caliper. The wear plates are inserts designed to be changed out when they show excessive wear. They get grooves worn into them. The slip standoff is off. Dog ear comes close to contacting the bowl. When I say slip standoff, I'm referring to how even the carriers are shutting. When they're in the full closed position, the tops should be even with each other. If one's sticking up higher, that could be an issue with your wear plates. Another factor that can cause slip standoff to be uneven is how centered the slip bowls are. Without the slip bowls being aligned and centered on the tubing, you can have one carrier sitting further in the bowl and biting harder on the tubing. This leads to slip carriers sticking when functioned and causes issues with them opening properly. If you don't have a piece of 7-inch casing on hand to center your slip bowls, we can get them pretty close through the following process. Start by transferring string weight to your traveling heavy slips. Then loosen off the stationary heavy slip bowl bolts. Shut your annular and ram 1 to center the tubing in the stack. Then shut your stationary heavy slips to align the bowl and snug the slip bowl bolts down. Once the stationary heavy slips are aligned, transfer the weight to the stationary slips. Loosen off the traveling heavy slip bowl bolts. Bring the jack up 2 to 3 feet. Shut the traveling heavy slips and slide them down the tubing in the shut position. This will align the traveling heavy slips with the tubing. Then you can tighten the traveling heavy bowl bolts back down. To line up the traveling snubbing slips, bring the jack up to a height to where you can access the snubbing slip bolts. Set your jack brakes and lock out the jack handle. Next, loosen off the bowl bolts, shut the traveling heavy slips, then shut the traveling snubbing slips. Once aligned, the traveling snubbing slips can be snugged back down, or you can leave the bolts cracked loose a hair to float the bowl whilst 3-slipping or going through transition. If you're floating the bowl, be sure to check the bolts every 25 joints or so to make sure they're not walking out on you and getting too loose. We tend to have a spacer installed on the slip bowl bolts for the stationary snubbers. This will allow them to float and self-align while snubbing pipe. If you don't have these installed, you can use the same process as the stationary heavy slips to align them. While performing milling operations, we need to make sure we have both of the traveling slip bowls and the stationary heavy slip bowls snugged down tight so we don't wallow out the threads for these bolts. The dog ear should also not be contacting the bowl. If it is, then that's telling you either your shear stock is sheared or your wear plate's getting out of tolerance. All of the 5/16 head Allens should be checked to make sure they're tight. We want those to be sitting down past the face of the wear plate. They can't be sticking out at all. If they are sticking out and they're tight, you might have an issue with the hole where you need to clean that out, re-tap it, make sure you get that bolt recessed down all the way in so it's not sticking out. So your boomerang or your half moon, those are designed to keep your wear plates in the event that you did have your bolts break on you that retain those wear plates in place. The bolts holding those down are nice and snug, and that you check those with a 9/16 socket. First thing I look at when I'm inspecting the carriers is the actual carrier bolts. So I want to make sure that they're properly adjusted. I'm going to snug them down. Once they bottom out, you don't really need to torque into it. Doing that makes the nylon and that lock less effective and wears it out quicker. Tighten them down so they just bottom out. And then we're going to go 3 half turns off. So 1, 2, 3. About a quarter turn on each side. 1, 2, 3. After I back those off, I put my wrench in between and then I check the gap between the two sides. So between my bottom bolt and my top bolt. I want those to be the same. I want it to be even. That way that carrier is shutting even on the tubing. So if it's a little bit off, I can go ahead and do my micro adjustments from there to get those evened up. Another thing to mention about these bolts, we change them out proactively every 6 months. They start to get worn down, but if they are worn down prior to that 6 months, please feel free to change them out early. We want to make sure this lock nut doesn't freely spin. If it does, it doesn't take much tension with that wrench to get it to move. Then we want to go ahead and replace that lock nut as well. One thing we got to make sure of to keep these slips working in good condition, keep the wear down, is that we're greasing them constantly. So with the carriers, we have a grease zert on the back of every carrier. We want to make sure that's taking grease. I shut my slips, crack them open just a hair, and then I go ahead and pump grease through that zert. That allows the grease to squeeze out the back and inside on those wear plates, allowing your slips to shut easily in and out and reduce wear. If the grease zerts aren't taking grease, not flowing out the back of the carrier, then go ahead and replace that zert. The zert itself is probably clogged. When inspecting the carrier itself, so where the die sits inside the carrier, you want to look at how much play you have. So if that die can slide left or right, more to where it protrudes out the side of the carrier, that's telling you that retention pin in the back is getting too worn down and you'll need to replace that. If it gets too worn down to the point to where it could slide past, you have the chance of dropping that die out, even with that cotter pin in place. The cotter pin, you want to make sure it's bent at a 45-degree angle on both sides, and every time we change these slip dies, we're going to put a new cotter pin in place. You also have to worry about the carrier stretch. Over time, these carriers are going to start to get worn out where the die sits and start to elongate. You'll see at the top of this die, you have a small groove where that locks into place. If that die isn't catching very much on that groove, then that could tell you that my carrier is starting to elongate, and I want to go ahead and swap my carriers out at that time. I also want to make sure that that's not starting to get deformed in any way, that little lip on the top of the carrier that holds the die into place. If it is getting too worn out, deformed, or the carrier itself is getting elongated, that die can fall out. As far as inspecting the dies themselves, we want to make sure they're not clogged up with trash. We want to make sure that they're nice and sharp. If you see them getting wear, especially on the bottom portion of the die, that's where we're going to see the wear start at first. So if you see these teeth getting flat, that could be a sign that those teeth are getting toward the end of their life. You also want to make sure that the dies aren't cracked and they're still in good shape, all in one piece. You also have to be mindful of this bottom groove. Not only can the top get worn out over time and over functions over the lifetime of the carrier, but this bottom groove will start to get rolled out and it'll start to get worn down to the point, especially in your snubbers, you'll see that die start to hang out from the back of the carrier. That's a good sign to let you know that we're going to have to swap those carriers out. If you take the die itself and move it up and down, there should be very little play. If there is play, the carrier is either getting elongated or one of my grooves are getting worn out. That's a sign we'll have to change out the carriers as well. Also, when you're inspecting your slip dies, we want to make sure that we have the proper size die installed and that they're all the same cut. So they're all directional, they're all pyramid, they're all straight cut. That way we have a good solid grip on that pipe. If you are changing out your dies, your slip dies, out of the stationaries, we are required by policy to pull that carrier. We're not changing it over the hole. So pull that carrier out, swap out your dies, make sure your pin and your cotter pin is bent properly, and then reinstall that carrier. Be sure to lock out the slips and dial them back out to 0 before anyone places their hands on the slips for an inspection. Good communication is crucial here between the operator and whoever is inspecting the slips. If you don't get confirmation that someone hears you or you don't know where their hands are at, do not function those slips until you know for sure. When you're inspecting the cam arms, we have two different styles. We have the style with the stopper that goes on the rear of the cylinder, and then we have the style without the stopper. When you're inspecting your cam arms, you want to make sure you have all of your snap rings in place, a washer behind that snap ring. You want to make sure you don't have any cracks at your welds, and you also want to make sure that your nut is tight on your stopper for the bolt going through your cam arm. What this stopper does is it prevents your slips from flipping out too far, from over camming. So that has to be adjusted far enough to where you have the full ID to pass a hanger through, so a 7-inch hanger, but you also don't want them opening up too far to where they flop outside of your bolt. I also want to talk about the cam arm bushings. So the cam arm bushing sits between the cam arm and the actual slip bowl. We have two different styles of bushings. We have a composite and we have a brass. They're both interchangeable. They do the same thing. But what we want to make sure is that we're not getting too much play in that bushing. So with my slips in the open position, I want to move each side of that cam arm up and down. Go to each corner. I don't want to have any play up and down, back and forth with that cam arm. So I don't want any slop between that cam arm and the inside of that bushing. If you get too much slop, it can get to the point to where your slips will actually jam in the open position. So very important to keep those in good shape. We also want to make sure that we're getting grease through the zert to the cam arm. A lot of times after these cam arm bushings start to get wore out, this groove will actually wear down smooth. This groove in the cam arm bushing, no matter which way it's facing or oriented inside of the slip bowl, it'll allow grease to get through the channel, go through the hole and onto the inside. So the inside where that cam arm is turning, that's where we want to make sure we get that grease. So if I'm pumping through this grease zert and I'm not getting grease in there, that's a good sign that that groove is completely worn out and it's just deadheading. At that point, I'll usually pop out my grease zert, try pumping through that. If everything works all right through that grease zert, then I'll know I'll go ahead and replace out my cam arm bushings. They're worn to the point to where I can't get grease to that part. If I can't get grease in there, not only is it going to continue to wear out my bushing at an accelerated rate, it's also going to start wearing on my cam arm itself. So let's try to get ahead of that, change that out before it starts to become an issue. Sometimes, especially with these composite bushings, this lip on the cam arm bushing can crack off. If you see the cam arm bushing start to work its way out from the bowl where it's seated, that's a good sign that your cam arm bushing has cracked and separated from that lip, and you'll want to go ahead and replace it at that time as well to prevent your bushing from completely coming out and your slips failing on you while jack and tubing. The hockey stick has brass bushings on it, similar to the bushing on your cam arms. That'll get wore down over time too. What you want to do there is make sure you don't have any play between your cam arm and the end of that hockey stick there. So I want to just try to move that hockey stick on the end of my cam arm. Also, I want to be mindful of the carbide pin where that attaches. Make sure that I can't move that up and down. I don't have any play in any of those bushings. Once those start to get some play, we'll go ahead and swap out that hockey stick. We do have 2 grease zerts on here. We want to make sure those are taking grease. We want to grease those regularly. Make sure we keep that lubricated so it cuts down on the acceleration of wear. You also want to do a visual inspection on the hockey stick. Make sure it's still straight, it's not bent, you don't have any cracks or any deformities in it. When we're inspecting the slip cylinder, one thing I always check is make sure this jam nut is tight. I want to get a crescent wrench on that, make sure it's nice and snug. I want to make sure that this carbide pin is in place, it's not broken, cracked. My cotter pin is installed, bent at 45-degree angle on both sides. We also have another cotter pin holding the carbide pin on the back of the cylinder. So with the adjustment on this cylinder, again, I want to make sure that it can open up enough to pass a hanger through. If you don't have this adjusted properly, it won't allow your slips to open up all the way. I usually start with 3 threads exposed on the cylinder, and then I'll fine tune my adjustment from there if needed. I also want to make sure I get a good look at my fittings, properly attached. There's no leaks, no cracks. In the cylinder itself, I want to make sure it's not dripping out where the cylinder goes into the bore. You want to make sure you don't have any cracks at the mounting points. And these carbide pins, you don't want to have any play in there. You want it to be nice and snug. So with the slips in the open position, I want to see how much play is at that carbide pin where it attaches to the hockey stick. So beyond a little bit of play, your issue is one of 3 things: the carbide pin, the hockey stick bushing, or the slip cylinder yoke starting to get wore out. You'll need to pop out the carbide pin and inspect these items to see what needs replaced. I want to do the same thing at the back of the cylinder. I want to try moving that cylinder up and down, back and forth. I don't want a lot of play. A little bit's okay, but I don't want a lot of play at the rear of that cylinder. When you're checking your dog gear, looking at from the side, that it's perfectly straight, it's not twisted left to right, bent, cracked, it's in good shape there. Next thing I want to check, I want to make sure my shear stock is in good shape. The way I do that is open up the slips, have the operator dial out the slip pressure, and lock out the slip handles. After it's safe to proceed, make sure you have your approved impact gloves on, then grab a hold of the carriers and apply forceful, direct pressure to the carriers back and forth. If you see any movement between the dog gear and cam arm, please notify your supervisor and repair the key stock as needed. If I'm unsure if they're sheared or not, I continue with a more thorough test. First, I shut my slips. I crack them open a hair. Once the operator has his slip pressure dialed out, his slip handles locked out, he's all clear there, I'll go ahead and crack off the bolts on the back. You don't need to back them off very far, just about a half a turn each. Once those are all cracked off, backed off a hair, if you get down to that last bolt and that carrier falls down, that tells you your shear stock is sheared and you need to go ahead and replace that at that time. So that's a quick way of checking your shear stock without having to take that carrier completely off. After you check your shear stock, you want to go ahead and snug down your bolts. When I snug the bolts down, I like to use a cross pattern. That way it tightens down even on that cam arm. One thing to be mindful of if you do have sheared key stock is that we run 2 pieces of key stock. So one on the front side of the cam arm and one on the back side of the cam arm. If any of these components fail inspection or out of tolerance, make sure they're removed from service, red tag, and sent back with the non-conformance items. The best thing we can do to limit wear and tear on our slips is grease, grease, grease. Just like the tongs, we want to make sure that they're greased at least once a shift, if not more. I always like to make sure that my traveling slips are greased before reaching transition, especially the back of the carriers. That way they're not going to be sticking in that bowl. Greasing these will extend the service life and allow them to function properly, open and close smoothly, and get you a lot longer wear life out of these slip components. If anyone has any questions after watching this video, please feel free to reach out to a member of the training or operations department. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.